It is an honor for me to introduce our speaker tonight, Kim Stafford. He brings a finely tuned and generous sensibility to his work and to his audience. He has lived in Oregon since he was a small boy and was educated at the University of Oregon, receiving a PhD in medieval literature. He is the founding director of the outstanding Northwest Writing Institute at Lewis and Clark College and the literary executor of the estate of his father, William Stafford. He has taught at Willamette University, the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, the Fish Trap Writers Gathering, and privately in Scotland, Italy, and Bhutan. Kim is the author of more than a dozen books, including essays, poems, and memoirs, and I think a children's book too, huh? His work has been published nationally and etched into local public art projects. He received a Governor's Arts Award in 1998 and the Stuart H. Hallbrook Legacy Award in 2007. Kim is a conscientious objector, an innovative thinker, and a popular public speaker and storyteller. Tonight he will talk about his memoir, I believe, 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do. I would guess that this is a particularly poignant time for Kim Stafford, and it is gracious of him to be here. In the prologue to his book, Early Morning, Remembering My Father, William Stafford, Kim writes, "How long can you feel a hand steady on your shoulder after that hand pulls away?" That's a question we could all be asking ourselves. Please welcome Kim Stafford.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming on this good Oregon night. Nice and dark, nice and wet. I want to start by telling a few stories about my mom. We lost my mom 3 weeks ago today. And she was 97. She had a magnificent life. And she was a character. She told a friend of hers who had just gone through a grief herself, "You need to be happy, because if you're happy, people will want to be near you. And if people want to be near you, you will be happy." So that kind of forthright, good vibration that my mom had. I'm thinking for the kids here, there's a story. Her first teaching job, she had 43 Spanish-speaking children. They were children of migrant families down in California. And she noticed they all drank coffee. They'd all talk about, coffee con leche esta mañana. You know, they had this wonderful cup of coffee. So she thought, well, I'm going to do a little health unit and teach them that coffee is not good for you. So she got 2 white rats in separate cages, and one of them every day would have a bowl of milk, and the other would have café solo, black coffee. Well, after a few days, it became apparent that the rat drinking milk was just a lazy bum and would just lie around and kind of stare. But the rat that had coffee loved to be held, you know, it was running on the wheel, it was just having a great time. And so I said, well, so what did you do? She said, I don't remember, but the rats moved to another room. She was an irrepressible character. My father said, Dorothy has a whim of iron. You know, that she would just decide, this is what I'm going to do. And when she was a young girl, when she was in high school, she and 3 of her friends had a singing quartet, and they'd go, sing in a neighboring church, and then they'd be invited home for supper with the family of the Reverend. So one day they went to Reverend Salzenberger's home for lunch, and he was so solemn, he was so formal, they got the giggles. They couldn't stop laughing. They were sitting at this, very fancy table, and they couldn't stop laughing, and Reverend Salzenberger was not amused. He didn't think it was very funny. So when they got control of themselves, he said, in my youth, when I was stricken by undue levity, I simply thought on eternity. And of course, this sent them off into fresh gales of laughter. They couldn't stop laughing. So my mom, she was just this great character. And, the stories go on and on. One time she went to school and her story was due that day. But she hadn't done it. So she said to her teacher, I did my story, but I left it at home. I'll bring it tomorrow. And her teacher said, oh, Dottie, I live near you. I'll just drive you home and you can run in and get your story. So this is probably about 1928. She can remember hour by hour the balance of that day. So the next period was physical education. She said that she didn't feel well, so she lay down on the cot and she thought of a story. The next hour was typing class. Typed the story, put it in her bag. Her teacher took her home. She ran in. She waited for a little bit. And she ran out with her story. And it won the contest. And the last day of that year, she very sheepishly went to her teacher and said, I have to tell, the teacher said, let me stop you right there. I know you hadn't written that story, Dottie. I'm a teacher. But it was a good story. So, fantastic lady. So every day I try to write something. And I sort of learned this from my dad. What you do is you take a sheet of paper and you put the date up here. My dad used to say, once I write the date on a piece of paper, I know I'm okay. You know, I have made it to my writing place, which, you know, I teach writing, and I know for my students, it's a big accomplishment. I've made it to my writing place. And then he would write a few little prose lines, and then he'd write a poem. So I've been trying to do this. So I'll just read today's poem. It's kind of a special day because, you know, it's 3 weeks since my mother passed. And it's 25 years to the day since my brother died. My dear brother Brett. He was a year older, 1988, November 7th. So I've just been aware that my people, I wrote a poem a couple days ago called Gallery of Ancestors. You know, they're on the other side. My father's over there. My grandparents are over there. My brother, my aunt. So this is called Anniversary of Darkness. Now that our father is gone and our mother passed, I can say it. You shaped us for a difficult bounty. By habit, silent about hard things, buoyant through the long good of childhood, until sorrow seeped from shadows to pluck my brother in a flash. The little missile of lead took him into orbit, the passing star every night centrifugal over my abiding confusions. So now I must celebrate alone what you all left me to do. You know, there's a line of Old English poetry I've always loved. The battle is not going well. In fact, it's a fabulous thing because it's a fragmentary manuscript. I mean, even the book is, the first few pages are torn away, and the battle is not going well, and the cowards have all, you know, run off into the woods to hide. And one of the old warriors says to the other, our courage must be the greater as our numbers grow less. You know, so that sense of, you know, now I've got them all with me. Well, I had this experience a few years ago. I was going to Nebraska, where my mom was born, where she spent her childhood. And I thought, well, I should write a poem about Nebraska. Would that be the honorable thing to do? You know, I've never been there, but it's where some of my people are from. And so I wrote a poem, and then I thought, oh, wait a minute, there was that other story. I'll write another one. Wait a minute, there was another one. 24 hours later, I had these 10 poems. This has never happened in my life before. I'll just read 2 of them. One for my mom, one for my dad. This one's called Prairie Prescription, True Story. You have been weakened, the doctor said, by your first 2 children's birth. This time you must obey without fail, or you will die. Harrison, my grandfather, are you hearing this? I prescribe an hour of beauty a day. Back at the farm at evening, Lottie retired to the rocker on the porch, while the fields turned velvet with purple and gold. Crickets tuned their little drums, and the breeze brought pollen from paradise. The dish towel on its hook, laundry basket tipped at the wall, socks not darned, bread not baked, the quilt pieced in its box, unsewn. Lottie folded her hands and gazed far into the shadows. Each day an hour of pure sky poured into the child curled inside her. Slanted sunlight braided into the rising, looming moon she tasted and swallowed, a thimble of starlight, a sip of dew. When the night came at last, the harrowing umbilical tangle inside her, the doctor sent Harrison and the children to the barn to pray. While inside Lottie, all that light and color and music and holy stillness clenched, writhed, and with a wild song, my mother was born. You know, I've really carried this through life, this story that the doctor prescribes an hour of beauty a day. Don't we deserve that? You know, an hour sitting with each other, maybe there's music, maybe there's a sunset, maybe we're looking at the album, maybe we're telling stories, maybe we're at the pond house, listening to songs. You know. So that's my prescription for you, an hour. Start with an hour and then work your way up. Okay, this one's for my dad. It's called Blue Brick from the Midwest. And the blue brick was, after my dad died, you know, I went in his office and I was sorting out things. And the bottom file drawer, you open it way in the back, the place you'd hide your secrets. There was this brick of love letters from my mom, tied with cotton string, that he had saved. They'd probably moved 30 times. She didn't know anything about it, but he'd hung on to these letters. So Blue Brick from the Midwest. And it has my father's last written words, and all my love. He was a softie. You guys who knew him probably didn't know that. Blue Brick from the Midwest. After my father collapsed like a bolt of light, toppled without a word, I was the one to enter his study, find a jagged note to our mother he scratched as he reeled, the freight train of his departure hurtling through his heart, and all my love. A sentiment he did not speak in 79 years as tough customer, affable but stern, inert when grief came, reserved as granite when my brother died, cracking plaintive jokes when we trembled in the hospital, mother going under the knife. His way was trenchant, oblique. He distrusted those who talk about God, preferring to honor the holy with a glance, a nod, or silence. Delving deeper the day he died, we found in his sock drawer, under that scant set of flimsy raiment, the fetching photo of the flirt, our mother, coy at the sink, looking back over her shoulder, dressed only in an apron with a big bow. No fool like an old fool. And delving deeper, at the back of the bottom file, the niche where one would hide the stuff of blackmail, I touched the blue brick of love letters our mother had sent him when they courted in the war. Brittle leaves kissed snug together and bound with string. The trove he had carried in secret through every move since 1943. She knew them not, nor had his. Oh, Billy, she said. Father, early years taught your way with the heart's contraband. When the dirty 30s blunted your bravado, tornadoes snatched your friends, the war your tenderness, and left you with these secrets hoarded for us to find when you were gone. My dad left word, in many forms. I just have all these books. somehow in the last year, these books have just come flowing out. I'll get to the one I'm supposed to read from a little bit later, but a few years ago, a friend of mine, you know how every once in a while a friend just says a magic sentence? Let's go to Bhutan. Has anyone been to Bhutan? It's a long way away. It's way up in the mountains. It's a tiny little country. It's very old. It's cold. We went in January. But everyone is so friendly. You know, someone did a study. The road bends every 9 seconds at 30 miles an hour. I mean, the roads don't go through the mountains the way we just go along the mountain like this, and it works its way down to a river. And I noticed on every bridge there was a word in Dzongkha, one of the 25 languages of Bhutan. And I can't read Dzongkha, but I started to notice it was clearly the same word. You know, I thought it would be the name of the river, but, you know, and so I asked our guide, Shitim Norbu, whose name means wish-fulfilling jewel. I said, what is that word? Oh, it says thank you. Well, why does it say thank you? Well, thank you. So it's just a wonderful place. And I'll just read one poem from here. We went to up over Duchola, we went through Pobjika, the valley of Pobjika, where the black-necked cranes come down from Tibet. And the king has decreed there will be no power lines in the valley of Pobjika because the cranes might injure themselves. You know, when you have a king, you can just make decisions like that. So Pobjika is a very, very dark place. And I'll just tell you one story about Pobjika. So we're sitting around the Bukhari, the wood stove, and it's popping with, you know, these pine billets, and it's very dark. And there's a man there named Shering. By the way, many people have the same name in Bhutan. I was walking along, there was a page someone had torn out of a phone book. Every single name was Karma. There were like 800 Karmas on this one page, you know. Well, Chering, he had the best excuse for missing class of my entire career. He said, Sensei, I will not be in class tomorrow. I have to do an errand for the king. But before I go, I just want to tell a story. I'll tell two stories that Chering told us. So once way up on the mountain, there was a farmer and his wife and their little daughter. And they had never been to the village. They'd heard that there was a village at the bottom of the canyon. It was very steep. There was no path. But one time the farmer decided, I'm going to go down there. And so it took him several days. He had to sleep on the way. He finally got down there and he went into this little tiny store they had there, and, you know, everything was so strange, and there was this one thing, he'd never seen anything like it. It was a little round piece of glass that we know as a mirror, but he'd never seen anything like that. He looked in it, and he saw his father's face, the face of an old man. So he hid it in his pocket, and he bought it, and he went back up the mountain, took him several days, and he would get it out just secretly and look at his father because he missed his father very much. And, you know, here's this old man. So his young daughter, about this age, she saw Papa looking at this thing. And so she saw where he hid it. So she went, when he went out to work in the fields, and she looked in, and there was a face of a beautiful young girl. And she started crying, and she went to her mother. Father has a picture of a young girl. He's in love with someone else. And so the mother said, oh, that's horrible. Show me. And so she came and looked. She said, don't worry, it's just an old lady. So that was one of the stories Shering told us. You know, and then he expounded, in Buddhism, what we see is not what is. You know, in Bhutan, one of the things they say is that every place, every person, every encounter has 4 levels of meaning: the visible, the invisible, the secret, and the deeply secret. I love that 3 of the 4 can't be seen. No. So the other thing that Chering told us, and I use this in writing class. You can use this for your optional homework. Those who know the Buddha view the past as destiny. These things had to happen to make me who I am. And the future is freedom. Knowing who I am, this is what I choose to do. Those who do not yet know the Buddha may view the past as a series of mistakes, errors, failures, even sins. In the future, as a series of punishments for those errors. They are not able to enjoy life. So I've thought, how do you turn your sense of the past from a series of failures to a sense of, that is my story? By writing. That's how you do it. That's how you become happy with your story. You think, my brother, I didn't see how depressed he was. I couldn't see. I thought I knew him, but I didn't know him. I failed my brother. Well, I knew what I knew of him. And now I know him better. And as I write, I come closer to him. So, turning that sense of incapacity into, that is my story. That is what made me who I am. I embrace that. Okay, so I was going to read a poem, I think. One night, we were in this place called Ugyen Choling. It was 2-hour walk beyond the end of the road. Very good place. And the first woman novelist of Bhutan, Ashi Kunzang Choden, lives there. And so there was this dog that barked all night. But I got to thinking about what Chering had taught, that, with your mind, there might be a way to turn your mind so that something that troubles you, you could realize it's part of the gift of your life. So in the writing of this poem, this is called Nado, the Good Guardian, at Ugyen Choling. Who are we to say when Nado begins to bark in the night outside our sleeping place, he has not protected us from a fierce ghost come to take a soul? Or perhaps the leopard has come along the thorny margin of the field to take another of our young foals. The dog delivers 32 barks. I was counting. Like hard, round beads, and the ghost thinks twice. The leopard turns, uncertain. Who are we to say this good guardian with frost on the fur of his back was not one of us in a former life, and now comes home to protect his people? 28 insistent barks, then a breath, 14 barks, then a round of 4 bark bursts. Om Mani Padme Hum. After all, he must face himself in the dusky mirror of a frozen puddle when dawn comes. So now, in the deep dark, while the foal trembles in her stall, the leopard crouches among thorns, the restless ghost turns at the window, and we human listeners hold this waking vigil hour by hour. Our good guardian keeps on chanting honestly for our protection. Who are we in our safe beds to say he is not the turning between the living and the lost? Who are we? Go to Bhutan. It's a good place. And this book was printed by a man named Gray Zeitz, Larkspur Press, Monterey, Kentucky. All handset type, hand printed, hand bound. He's a crazy man. He's been doing this for 40 years. And he called up, I was in front of a computer helping to design the cover of this book with InDesign. And my phone rang. It was Gray. He said, Kim, I've selected some papers for the end sheets. I have 3 handmade papers here for the limited edition. I'm going to mail them to you, but if you don't like them, I'll find some other ones. I'm going to live in that world too. Okay, so I have this book, 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do, How My Brother Disappeared. And just read a few little passages here. When you write about a hard story from your family, it's a very strange undertaking. And when my mom read it, she said 2 very interesting things. She said, part of my fate being related to a writer is my faults have become immortal. And the other thing she said was, Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living, but after reading your book, I think maybe the over-examined life is not worth living either. So, to take a family story and put it out there, we essentially didn't talk about my brother for 23 years. It was just, we missed him so much. It was so hard to talk about him. And I finally decided I have to talk about him because I want to be with him. I want to reach back through the difficulty of his end to touch again the beauty of our beginning. Because we just had this wonderful childhood. So I'll just tell you one little thing about our childhood. So every night we would, somehow our parents talked us into going to bed at 6:30. Does anyone go to bed at 6:30? Try doing that in June. And so we would say, can we whisper and sing? Yeah, for a while. So we would whisper and sing, and we had these games. We had, these 2 twin beds, and we played this one game where one would put his hands on the floor and make a bridge. So your feet are on one bed, your head is on the other, and you got there. Then the other one crawls across your back, and then we trade and we go back, and then we'd start to get a little sleepy eventually, and then we had this formula we said to each other: "Good night. God bless you. Have sweet dreams. See you tomorrow." And when I came to write this book and write these, I actually wrote 132 little chapters, and my editor cut it down to 87, so it's a little untrue to say 100 tricks. But I found myself organizing them into 4 sections. Good night, that was my brother's last year. God bless you, that was our early childhood, that was so beautiful. Have sweet dreams, that was our going off to college and these wonderful experiences we had. And then see you tomorrow, that was the year after he died. So I'll just read the beginning here, the prologue, and a few little passages. In 1958, when he was 10, my older brother Brett found an ad in the back of a comic book and ordered 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do. When this pamphlet of secrets arrived, he flipped through to the last and most difficult trick: how to jerk a tablecloth away but leave the wine glass standing. I've heard since, it's got to be linen with no selvage and lots of talcum powder. You don't just do it with a tablecloth. Anyway. Like many tricks in this life, the materials were ordinary, but the required sleight of hand approached the impossible. He waited until everyone was gone from home, set the finish sherry glass on the dish towel, a handmade crystal. If you're going to do it, you might as well, get the best thing. Brett held the selvage in his hands, took a breath, and yanked the cloth. Shattered glass went everywhere. Long after Brett was gone, I would tell our son Guthrie, who had never met his uncle, stories of that era when I had a brother and the world was young. It was an era spangled with mysteries and delights. One day, when Guthrie was 10, as we sat at our family table, he took the edge of the tablecloth in his hands, cast a sly smile in my direction, and said, "Dad, shall I do the trick?" He laughed, made a feint to twitch the cloth in his hands, and my mind went far. The present moment dropped away, and I watched my brother in a parade of enigmatic moments from childhood through our years together and beyond. Guthrie, I said, I could write a book about Uncle Brett called 100 Tricks Every Boy Can Do and tell all kinds of stories from this life. Yeah, Dad, Guthrie said, but suicide was the trick that didn't work. Well, one of the tricks. In my brother's life, his last desperate day was but one in an array of mysteries. How many tricks are required to become a man? What have been my own encounters with this fierce set of hidden tests and amazing feats? And Guthrie, this man-child in my life, what moments from his story best reveal our need? The essential code must include the tricks of confidence, loneliness, sex, fear, anger. How to begin a courtship and know it is right. How to end a job when it goes wrong. How to crawl from the wreckage when your life falters. How to plunge to the cellar of sorrow and grope for the ladder that might bring you back into some kind of light. How many lessons must be clawed from trouble in order to survive? By what infinite practice in sleight of hand does one become a human being? Now, this book, it's about a particular sorrow and glory in my family, but my hope for this book is that it will be useful for anyone who has a long, difficult story to write. Because what I figured out is how to write it in many short chapters. I could not write a chapter that would explain what happened. That's not an option. I'm just not wise enough. But I could say, oh, remember this time? I'll tell that. It'll be about that long. Just to give you one example, the shortest chapter in the book. My brother and I went up to the junior high in summer, where he was going to be in junior high. He'd graduated from 6th grade. And so we were skulking along below a bank, and some kids were playing baseball, and the ball came flying over and hit my brother on the head. He started crying. I started crying. One of the big kids looked over and said, looks like we got 2 birds with 1 stone. So the chapter is just that long. It doesn't exactly explain anything, but it's part of the mosaic of memory that returns me to my brother's company. So let me just read 2 of the lighter chapters from this book. This is called Dusk at Blitzen. My brother and I, we just had this glorious time in college. We would get bored, get a car, and go east to the desert, where you just follow a road. There are no signs. You don't need signs. It's just open country. You just go. These were some of the real beautiful times. On one of these vagabond transects in eastern Oregon desert country, my brother and I decided we had to see Blitzen, a blue dot identified as a ghost town on one of our older maps. We headed east through Bend to Burns, then south to French Glen, south from French Glen on a series of ever simpler roads until we were barreling along in the Oldsmobile on a 1-lane dirt track through the sage. Has anyone been to Blitzen? All right. I was driving. We were rattling along at about 50, trading stories and wild ideas, when my brother suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Without seeing what he saw, I hit the brakes, and we went into a long skid through a plume of dust. When the car came lurching to a halt, the front bumper was just pressing against a barbed wire gate across the road. He had seen it. I had not. We opened the gate, rolled through, closed the gate, and picked up speed. I don't remember much about the town, or what was left of it. A few leaning, false front buildings, and weathered pine and rusted artifacts half buried in rabbit brush and tumbleweeds. It was dusk by then, and as my brother started up the car, he noticed the fuel tank was just about empty. I had missed that. It was a classic moment. Should we meekly retrace our path for a known distance to a known gas station? Anyone vote for that? Or should we go on? by guess and gamble to see what might turn up. As I remember the moment, we studied the last gold light across the western rim of the horizon and felt the gathering chill in the air. My brother voted to go back, and I voted to go on. Or it might have been the other way around. We traded off as cautionary and loony. At any rate, we decided to go on, and seeing a single light across the desert in a northwesterly direction, I suggested we abandon roads, aim for the light, and make our way through the scattered sage across the open country. What followed was a trance-like passage through the gathering dark. Sage blurred on each side, as my brother chose every opening that offered us the general direction of that light. We drove in silence for a time. Stars came on through the windshield. The far light glinted hard with a tinge of blue. The car bounded over the soft ground as his hands on the wheel swayed back and forth in a kind of dance, and I felt my brother and I were suspended in a little eternity of affection and good luck. The light got no closer. We realized how clear the desert air must be. You could see forever across the dark earth. The engine hummed, and a coyote flashed away where our headlights swept the gray sage. That was a great trip. Let's see, how are you doing? Well, I think I should maybe take a break and sing a song here, but because I'm reminded of that country. We stopped in French Glen on another trip with my wife and son. And there was the French Glen store. How many people in the French Glen store? Right, there was maybe a 12-year-old girl standing out on the porch. And, I said, how are you doing? And you know the way kids and truth tellers, sometimes they just answer that question? She said, I'm here because I messed up. I said, oh, what happened? Well, I'm actually from Oregon City, but I messed up. I won't go into detail, but they sent me out here. Just driving out here was enough to cure me. And so, I got this job. I sweep up the store here, and, I'm staying with this family, and God, I just hide out in the barn because, they're nice people and all, but I just kind of like to be alone. I got these barn cats. She just started pouring out these cats that she'd feed, and then she'd say, but I go up on this hill here in the morning, and that is beautiful. And so, I drove on. I got to the Fish Trap Writers Gathering. Has anyone been to Fish Trap? It's way out there, Wallowa County, at the old Methodist camp. And I took a songwriting class, and our teacher, Marv Ross, quarter flash guy, he said, okay, I want you to think of someone you don't know, but you met. And I want you to write 5 pages of detail about that person's life. What do they think about when they wake up? Who are their friends? What do they do when they're lonely? What do they do in the middle of the night? What do they eat? Just write out all this stuff. And then see if there's something in what you've written that is about you. Very tricky assignment. So I ended up writing this song. Oh, and I should say my grandmother would always say, you know what is right. Grandma named me Bernice, but she called me Baby Boo. I don't suppose that means much to you. She passed away. Left me here working at the store. Funny little job, sweep dust out the door in the evening. But in the morning I climb the hill. Sun's up, gold, and the world is still for a moment. That's when time opens the sky. and Grandma never died. Baby boo, you know what to do. Keep kind in your mind, baby boo. This here's thunder, that there's crazy fool. I don't suppose stray cats are much to you, but to me, they don't ask much, milk in a bowl, like when you whisper to a soul in secret. Across the road, light in the field, the flattened grass is where I kneel to see. Shapes in the clouds, forms from the past. What you believe is what will last, baby boo. You know what to do. Keep kind in your mind, baby boo. In the dark where I lie alone, it's like I got Grandma on the phone with me. I hear cats in the yard, frogs in the dark, wind in the trees, and the farm dog barks far away. People here want me to do the things they seem to think are true and smile. Happiness and summer snow, you love what you love and it comes and goes, baby boo. You know what to do. Keep kind in your mind, baby boo. But in the morning I climb the hill, sun's up, gold, and the world is still for a moment. That's when time opens the sky, and Grandma never died, baby boo. You know what to do. Keep kind in your mind, baby boo. Keep kind in your mind, baby boo. You know, the people around us, they're so full of stories. I think that's why I'm a teacher. I realized recently I'm less interested in finished writing than in writing in the process of being made. And actually, I'm less interested in writing than in writers. And actually, I'm less interested in writers than in people. I just love to be with people, looking at stories, telling stories, remembering things. Well, I'm going to read one more thing from here and then end with a story from another book that came out this year. It's out of control. Actually, it's a reprint, but this is called Crevasse. After my brother died, I was going through his stuff, and I found this letter he wrote. He went off to college in Grinnell, Iowa. And there we go. Hey, we got some Midwesterners here. And he wrote this letter. He said, as we're flying over the Cascades, I looked down. I probably freaked out the guy next to me, because I just had to look down at Jefferson Park. And I wished I had a parachute. He didn't want to leave Oregon. Why would any right-thinking person want to leave Oregon? Anyway, so this is going back to that country called Crevasse. When we were Boy Scouts, my brother and I were among the older boys, with special dispensation to stray beyond. We were the ones who went ahead along the trail and with practiced knuckle and palm printed bear tracks across the path, then dawdled until the rest of the troop caught up and asked our scoutmaster with furrowed brow about these tracks and savored his extended discussion of safety, the buddy system, and personal hunting exploits. We were the ones who set up distractions for our leader so the other boys could slip stones into his pack, one at each stop, to slow him down, give us all a reprieve from the forced march. We were the ones who enjoyed the pleasure of his volcanic laugh when he opened his pack in camp. I remember him just shouting, "I'm not as old as I thought I was." It's just, he's wrong. We thought he was going to kill us, but he was so excited. It made his day. We were the ones who almost managed to launch the smallest boy into flight tied to a 20-foot pine sapling bent to earth. I remember we were making this snare. And so, 40 boys were pulling this about a 20-foot sapling down. And then the word went along the line. By the way, don't let your children join Boy Scouts. The word went along the line, "Let go." And Danny Rosen went flying. Fortunately, he had a death grip on the top of the tree, so he sort of went back in camp, at our favorite place of all, Jefferson Meadows, high in the Central Oregon Cascades, we ate from boxes of primitive Bernard's dehydrated food, wrapped in paper-backed foil, swam naked in the lake, waged a losing battle against mosquitoes, practiced knot work, held compass contests, performed Morse code mirror flashing, created first aid plans for the macabrous scenarios invented by our scoutmaster, and survived other episodes in learning to be soldierly men. One morning, my brother and I got to looking at the mountain where it rose abruptly from the meadows surrounding our camp. What was it like up there? How high could you go? What dangers and wonders lurked far above the trail? Somehow, we convinced our scoutmaster, a benign miniature Marine, to let us find out. I cannot believe this. Can you believe the scoutmaster said, "Sure, boys, head on up there." Just the two of us, if we promise to rope up and proceed with care. Yes, sir. It seems fantastic now that he gave permission. We knew nothing about mountains. We scrambled up a forested ridge to where the trees were twisted by wind and shattered by avalanche. Then we stepped out onto the glacier. We donned flimsy snow goggles we had made from foil from the food packets, with slits cut Eskimo style to block the splendor of the sun on ice. And we had a 10-foot length of manila line tied with a bowline knot around my brother's waist and a matching bowline around mine. My brother went first. We had discussed the dangers of the hidden crevasse, fueled by a rumor we had heard from some nature show the other boys had watched. So you young folks, before the internet, this is how you learned things. Someone had seen a TV show, and they passed on the lore, so the dangerous crevasses. My brother took a boulder about the size of his head and flung it violently onto the glacier in front of him. When no crevasse opened, he stepped forward, picked up the stone, and flung it down again like a cartoon figure, repetitive. I brought up the rear, and thus we made our halting, staggering Sisyphean way across the white blank steep. We climbed until we could no longer see the camp or the ant boys far below. We climbed until we found ribbons of ice in a hue of blue we had never known. The air was ethereal, and we had returned to some pure form of boy, unencumbered by effort beyond the physical. Pleasure in seeing, in being, in ascending as two in one. There was a kind of light up there I have not seen anywhere else. The light was so clear that the image of my brother stepping doggedly ahead of me, could not be tarnished by time. It was a visual effect that my field guide to weather describes as not rare, but rarely seen. We climbed until my brother's arms began to shake, lifting the stone. Oh, I have to pause here. We used to watch Zorro at Pat O'Shea's house, and there was a character in Zorro named Senor Mendoza, which we started calling each other Senor Mendoza for some reason. It was, this is how close we were. We had the same nickname. So, well, Senor Mendoza, what do you think? And then it became Senor Mendelfos, and then it became just Senor. So we just say to each other, Senor. I remember teetering on the brilliant slope, our bodies steaming, my brother's face shining with sweat and with a fire from within. Senor, he said. Not a question, a connection. The rope lay still on the snow between us. For a few moments we stood, not speaking, but gazing, not asking, but feeling, being, aching, brimming. Then we retraced our safe steps, followed our tracks across the boundary of heaven to earth, scrambled down the ridge of twisted trees, and stumbled at dusk into camp for a welcoming bowl of Bernard's minestrone and blackened biscuits on a stick. I've thought often of that venture. Had the crevasse opened, we would both be gone. One in a sudden slide and shout, and the other, me, after a brief hesitation before the rope jerked taut. I see us there, two specks against the splendid glare of white, hopeful, breathless, joined in life or doom as one. My brother, though gone, still leads me across that steep. So, as I say at the end of the book, I think this is my favorite sentence in the book. Since my brother died, we have never been apart. That's the power of a writing project. You go back and, I feel like I probably know my brother better than anyone in my family. We just did crazy stuff together. And I want to live with the beauty of who he was. And I couldn't get that by talking with people. I had to get it by writing. I think I'll end there. Thank you so much for coming. Have a cookie. Buy a book if you can't help it. And support your library.